So I just read What You Are Looking For Is in the Library by Michiko Aoyama. This is a wonderful book. Just the most positive, uplifting, just it's just such a nice book. I highly recommend this to anyone and everyone. Best book I've read in a long time. Best is a very subjective term. Most enjoyable book I've read in a long time. Super short, and it even feels shorter because it is. I've heard it described as a collection of short stories, which I don't really like because there are 5 sort of stories, but they're all so interconnected, and characters pop up again and again throughout different stories. It's just phenomenal. So the whole premise is that there are people who are unhappy in life, or who are sort of struggling mentally, and they somehow make their way to this library just coincidentally, and the librarian at the reference desk gives them a list of books they're looking for, and the list will always include one book that seems very random and out of place. But by reading that book and getting that book, it sort of changes their perspective on life, and they're able to sort of see things a different way, and start on a path to sort of a better life. Now, at first, if you're a realist or even a pessimist, you're going to think this is ridiculous. It's all just pure coincidence, and of course they all live happily ever after, but life's not like that. But and I did think that about the first 2 stories especially, but the third, fourth one especially I really liked. It just shows how not attitude is everything, but how the way we look at things we can sort of be our own worst enemy. We can sort of entrap ourselves and not realize just how many options we do have. And I know not everyone has a lot of options, but even the characters of this book, and they're so varied. The author just kind of blew me away by because there are 5 different characters, 5 different POVs, and each of those POVs feels just as genuine as the last. Wonderful, wonderful book. So the different POVs, we start with 21-year-old Tomoka, who is a sales assistant working part-time at a department store, and she's sort of unhappy with her life. She's like, I thought life would be so much better than this. I thought I would, I'm only working in a department store. Like, I could do so much better for myself. What am I doing? Which, as someone who worked in retail for years, like, I mean, I vibed with a lot of these characters. Like, I mean, obviously there's some whose experience I have definitely not shared, but a lot of the experience from at least 3 of them I have shared. Anyway, so Tomoka, who's she's sort of not happy with her life. She's a bit of a mess. She's always grabbing fast food or eating out or eating at convenience stores. Her house is a bit of a mess. So she decides, she talks to one of her friends at work, or not at work, but anyway, she talks to someone, and he's like, you should upgrade. So she wants to learn how to use Microsoft Excel, because she's like, I need computer skills. If I can get that, then I'll have the skills, and I can sort of work towards a better job. So that takes her to the library to get books on Excel. The library is part of this community center, and in the community center there are she's taking classes there to learn Excel. So she goes to the library to get books. She's given this book, this kid's book, and she's like, why am I given this kid's book as a recommendation? So she takes it out and reads it, and turns out that in the book the characters find an egg, and they don't really know what to do with the egg, so they end up cooking it into something. It doesn't matter what they cook, but she sort of wants to create the same thing, so she gets really into cooking and perfects this thing, which brings her closer to that boy that she was talking to at work, and she starts like sort of cleaning up her apartment, and still working on her computer skills, and she now really has this joy of cooking, and it just sort of things sort of spiral into control, and things are looking better. But the whole thing is just her changing her perspective on life. Instead of feeling bad for herself, sort of wallowing in her pity, she's trying, and she's step by step getting better. She also sees an interaction with one of the other workers at her job, and sort of sees that, man, this can be a good job. Like, it's sort of not honorable, but it's an important profession, and like, if I do it right, there's satisfaction in that, and so she gets a different viewpoint on her own job, even though she's still looking for something else. And anyway, it's really good. This first one, at first I'm like, this is kind of ridiculous, like not very realistic. It's a bit too optimistic for me, but still really good. So the second one is this guy Urase, who is a 35-year-old accountant. He works for this big company. He's got an office job. He's got a secretary, and his secretary is the niece of the company president, and so she sort of is kind of lazy and doesn't really do her job and gets on his nerves, and he snaps at her one time, and then she goes to HR and claims that he like threatened her and blows it all out of proportion, and so he's really upset. But later on, his boss sort of comes to his rescue against the company president's niece and is like, no, he would never do that, and sort of helps him out. But anyway, so he's just sort of miserable, and he's like, he always has wanted to open up an antique shop. He when he was a kid, he would go to this antique shop, and he just loves antiques and loves sort of the story of an item and how it's sort of traveled and interacted and interconnected with so many people, which a lot of this book is talking about interconnections and how every person you meet has unknown consequences, and we make little impacts in people's lives that have consequences that we could have no idea, or we could never anticipate. Anyways, he really wants to make this antique shop, but he keeps saying one day, and putting it off, and he's only 35, and he's like, there's sort of no way he can do it. His girlfriend is 25. She lives with her parents still, and she's sort of running her own kind of like Etsy style online shop where she creates jewelry. And he's kind of jealous of her in that he sees her sort of playing and just doing a hobby, and she doesn't really have any responsibilities because she still lives with her parents. And he sort of snaps at her at one point, but he's given a list of books because he goes to the library as well. And one of the books he gets is about plants, or about worms, and it discusses worms and plants, and how he starts thinking about the plants and how half of the plant is above ground that we see, but another half of the plant is below ground that we don't see. And that metaphor really speaks to him. He also, through a series of coincidences at the community center, gets in contact with this shop owner who has this shop it's a bookstore. It has lots of cats in it. Cats just hang out. All the books are about cats, and there's also beer there. And the owner of that shop was just like, I just wanted to be surrounded by books, cats, and beer. And so he would say is asking this guy like, how did you like do this? Have this shop? The guy's like, well, I have two jobs. I work he calls it parallel careers. He's like, I've got the one job that's sort of keeping me financially stable, and then I run this shop in the other time, and I just do it for fun. Not just for fun, like he tries to make money with it too, but he sort of has to balance too. And so that sort of opens up his mind. He's like, again, half the plant's visible above ground, the other half's below ground. I can open up an antique shop while still working this other job, which to me sounds like a lot of work to doing two full-time jobs, but maybe they're both part-time. Anyways, and he comes to realize that his girlfriend's not just playing around. Like her shop, her online shop, is an actual career as well. And so he finally goes to his girlfriend and he's like, hey, I heard about this parallel careers thing. I'm going to keep my job, but I'm going to try and open up this antique shop. Stop putting it off forever. And she's like, well, great. Like, let's get married. Let's do it together. And he's just like overjoyed. And so, yes, they get married and open up an antique shop and live happily ever after. Which was really cute and sweet. But again, it was him changing his perspective, and instead of seeing him as being stuck in this one job and have to try and save up the money to do his to fulfill his passion years on into the future, he just does it in the now. The third POV, which was probably my favorite one, the middle one, was this girl Natsumi, who was an editor at a magazine, and she was like a go-getter workaholic who was just great at her job. She really wanted to get there's this older author who was very distinguished, and to get her to write a story for this magazine, even though the magazine was directed at young women, and she did all this work basically and got this woman to publish in this magazine, and it like blew up, and they ended up publishing it as a book. And even though it's a magazine publishing company, she worked really hard to get it published as a book as well, and she was like the rising star in this company. But then she got pregnant, which she was like okay with because she was in her late 30s. She's like, if I ever I'm gonna have a kid, this is now the time to do it. So she has a kid, and the whole time she's on maternity leave, she's thinking about, okay, when I get back to work, this is what I'm gonna do. She's keeping up with all the trends and whatever. But then something like 6 months after giving birth, she goes right back to work, and she's told that, well, you have a child now, so you won't be able to maintain your full workload. So we're moving you to a different department. So she essentially gets demoted because she has a baby, and it just sort of breaks her. And so this is 3 years later. She has a toddler, and she's noticing that while because she's a woman, has been forced to sacrifice a lot of her career and her time to look after the child. Her husband sort of hasn't had that expectations, and she sort of sees her child as holding her back in her career, even though like just saying that makes her feel awful because she loves the child, and she does not sort of see the child as in any bad way at all, except for that she still feels that really guilty feeling, but understandable feeling that like, oh, I'm being held back because I have this child. And so a whole bunch of things happen, and there's sort of one spark of joy where the person who has her old job, asks her to help out, meet with the author, because the book's turning into a movie now. She says, meet with that author that you worked with. And she's like, yes, I can have my old, not her old job back, but she can like meet this author, and sort of who knows where that will go, and just to be back in that world will feel really good. And of course, the day that she's going to do it, her daughter kind of feels like she has a fever, but she's like, no, it's okay. Send her to daycare. And just before the meeting, she gets a call from the daycare saying, hey, your daughter has a fever. You need to come pick her up. And of course, the husband can't because he's away on business or whatever. So she has to go do it. And again, sacrifice this meeting. And it just sort of, it doesn't break her, but like, oh, that's rough. Like the sacrifices you have to make for children. But the author wants to meet her old editor, so they meet up later for coffee, and she has a good cry. And anyways, this is my favorite one, so I'm going really into it. But eventually she goes to the department store where the other girl's working, and meets with that girl's boyfriend, who was an ex-coworker of hers, and tells him that she's decided she's going to try to get into book publishing. She's worked at this magazine forever, but she really wants to publish books. So she's applied to this opening at this publishing company, and it seems to be going great and like happily ever after. But then she gets rejected by this company, and just like, it's not like I said earlier, like feels kind of unrealistic or too optimistic, but having little things like this really made it feel more realistic. So she doesn't get the job, her dream job. But because she had mentioned it to that ex-coworker at the department store that she was looking for jobs, he was in contact with one of his ex-coworkers and found out that this other publishing company that publishes mostly kids books, one of the editors is going on maternity leave, or not maternity leave, but something to do with her daughter. She's moving away or something, so they need a replacement. So he suggests her, and she does end up getting that job. So even though it is primarily in this publishing company works primarily with child books, they do try and branch out and do with other literary fiction, which is sort of her job. So in the end, she's got this job where her child is not seen as a hindrance, but as an asset. So like the other workers there bring their children to work, and because they're working with children's books, they're always asking the children what their opinion is on it, and it's sort of a happily ever after. That's probably the most extreme of the 5 stories where everything sort of goes totally according to plan. So the fourth one, which again I really liked, is this guy Hiroya, who is a 30-year-old NEET, so not in employment, education, or training. So he sits at home all day reading manga and watching TV, living with his mom, and he had always wanted to be an artist. And his 30th, sorry, not his 30th, but he's turning 30, so they're having a big school reunion, and they're opening up this time capsule. And he's really embarrassed because he's like, oh, I'm pretty sure I put in there that I'm going to be the best artist ever, or something like that, a world famous artist. And he's like, I'm nothing. Because he had gone to art school, but he couldn't find a job afterwards. And he tried various things and part-time jobs in retail, and it just like a lot of social anxiety and stuff, a lot of stuff that I can really relate to. And I know a lot of people, I know a lot of NEETs. It just felt, it was very well written, this character. So he goes there and he finds out, he goes to the graduation, he finds out the time capsule thing that he did. He didn't say that he wanted to be the world's best artist or whatever. He said that he wanted to create art that would be remembered. And that sort of changes his perspective. He also goes to the library because his mother asks him to pick something up. Anyways, he ends up there and gets recommended this book on evolution, which has lots of photographs of different animals, which really sparks his creativity. And he starts drawing again and creating these really obscure creatures. So he's drawing again. He's getting out of the house, and so he keeps going back to the library to read this book. There's a reason that he can't take it home. It's too big or something. So he just keeps going back to the library and reading it there, and gets to know the people who work there at the community center. And he finds out that there's someone had to go away, and so they're looking for someone to fill in. And so he volunteers to do it. So he gets a part-time job at this community center doing various things, while also like working on flyers and putting his art into things, and still like just working on his art in the library. And sort of, again, that's not like the last one where he gets his dream job and lives happily ever after, but it's that next step that he's able to take, because it sort of changes his perspective that he isn't super far behind in life just because he's 30 and sort of doesn't have a career and isn't the greatest artist ever. Like he meets someone at the reunion who was always wanted to be a novelist and was always writing but had never published anything. And they sort of catch up, and that guy then calls him a few days later and says, "I'm getting published. Like, can you believe it?" And I think because that the coolest part of this is it's not just individual story. All these are connected. So I think he's getting published by the woman from the third one who ended up working for the publishing company. Like they're all interconnected, which is really cute because they're POV. So I think it would be a really cool movie. Like it could easily be a movie where you would see the other actors playing the other characters, just like almost as little cameos in the different POVs. Anyway, so that's the fourth one. The final one is this guy Masao, who is 65 years old. He's just retired. He worked at the same place for 42 years, and he sort of doesn't really know what to do with himself. He feels super cut off from society. He realizes that all his friends and acquaintances and everything, all his social sort of connections were only related to work. And now that that's gone, he doesn't really have anything besides his wife and his daughter. And so he goes to the library, and the librarian gives him a list of books along with this one child poetry book, which he reads. And then he gets into poetry, and there's this thing that's, I forget where it came up, but it was like create your own anthology, write little bits of poetry that you like and sort of add it together, and then you can sort of collect it in your own personal anthology. And so he sort of takes that mindset and sort of tries to collect not just poetry but little experiences and little things and try different things and like nothing big. Like it starts out with him wanting a new hobby, so his wife suggests he learn Go. They're learning Go. They're teaching Go at the community center, so that's where he goes to get some books on Go. So he's doing that as well, even though it's really hard. There's this whole thing with crabs and how it's like a metaphor for, instead of just looking forward, having the narrow view of always looking forward, to sort of turn and walk sideways like a crab, and then you can see ahead of you just like a glimpse of what's coming, but you can also see a glimpse of what came behind, but you're also looking like not ahead or behind, you're living in the present and sort of enjoying each day for itself. And his whole thing was like, I'm 65, what do I do with the time left to me? And through his conversations with the librarian, he sort of changed his perspective that it's not the time I have left, it's just time. I exist, I live in the present, I should just enjoy it. I shouldn't think like, oh, I've only got so much time left, what am I going to do with myself? Like just live. And another very positive, hopeful message. And he also thinks like, I could still get another job. So he's always like, he's still keeping his eye out for other work, and maybe getting another job somewhere else. So yeah, it's these 5 characters who all meet this librarian, Sayuri Komachi, I think is her name, Sari Komichi. She, who's described by all the characters as being very large, which is kind of strange. But that's the first thing they notice is like, wow, this woman's huge, but she's like super sweet and like very wise, and she's the one who just sort of gives them the advice and the book recommendations and sort of helps them sort all their lives out. And so yeah, after reading so many books that are just like dark and despairing and full of awful things, this was just a huge breath of fresh air. And it's so short, I could just read it again. I could read it so many times. Another interesting thing is that all the books that were recommended by the librarian, I thought they were just sort of made up books. They're all totally real books. Like the at the back of this book, it gives a list of all of the books that were mentioned. They're all like real books, and just like a really nice, pretty book as well. It's got like this like pink foil on the cover and like a cute like cat in front of a window, like a cherry blossom tree in the background, and I love like an aesthetic nice book, which this very much is. Yeah, I heartily recommend this book to anyone. What You Were Looking For is in the library by Michiko Aoyama.